Good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's edition of The Law and You. I am your host, yours truly, Attorney at Law Shellon, Washington, licensed in the state of New York, in my home country, Guyana, and also in the Twin Island of Trinidad and Tobago. Today, I'm going to bring to you an edition regarding damage to property. There's been a recent trend happening in New York, especially in Brooklyn, which I would like to speak to those of you who reside in Brooklyn and may own a property in Brooklyn. This might be of particular interest to you. So I would encourage you guys to share this live, share it to as many people as you can, tag a friend or some neighbor or somebody who might be experiencing this issue and they might have, mentioned it to you. So there's a recent trend happening right now in Brooklyn. It's called gentrification. And in that process, a lot of the old buildings are being torn down and developers are putting up new high-rise buildings about 3 floors up high. And they're also going down into the ground, like digging deep into the ground, basement level, and possibly parking, whatever they choose to do on the ground level. So I want to talk to you about that because I've been having several cases involving damage to property with the developers putting new buildings up, tearing the old ones down. They're causing problems for a lot of property owners, people with smaller properties. So this recent trend has been affecting most of the people who've been in Brooklyn for a while. They've owned their property probably since the 1990s, 1980s, whatever, but they've owned those properties for a while. And a lot of the older properties, people are selling their properties out. They're selling out and they're moving out of Brooklyn. And the ones who decide that they're going to stay, they're the ones who are most likely affected by this new trend that has been taking place in the city of Brooklyn. So let me explain what has been happening, guys, because I've had several cases involving this type of situation. So people will have their property built since the 1930s, whatever, but the properties are basically very old. And then these new developers will buy the neighboring property that somebody may have died, left it, and the estate sold the property. Or it could have just been a situation where the owner wants to move out of Brooklyn because they're retiring to some other state and they sold the property and an investor might have purchased that property. When those investors purchases those types of properties, what happens is they tear the property down. Once the property is torn down, they start to do excavation work, which means that they're digging into the ground to remove the foundation that was there, and they're digging down even further so that the foundation of the new property will go deeper into the surface of the earth. So when that is happening, they're doing something called, they're using a certain equipment that would excavate the land, and it causes vibration sometimes. A lot of times people feel vibration if the investors are using the wrong tools. If they hire a company that is using the wrong tools or the wrong method, it causes vibration on the neighboring property. And when that vibration happens, cracks begin to surface on the foundation, on the property, on the walls, everywhere. So guys, if you own a property in the state of New York and your neighbor sells theirs and you see investors come there to take their work, make sure you do a couple of things. The first thing you want to make sure, if the investor is not offering to do it, you can pay someone to do what is called a pre-construction survey on your property. Meaning you get a survey or you get a company come in your property and they take pictures all over on the property. They take inside of the rooms, the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom, all of the walls. They capture those pictures. They capture the ground. They capture the basement. They make sure that there are no visible cracks or opening on your property. Once those pictures are taken and a detailed report is done from an engineer who you get to inspect your property prior to the investors doing their work on the next door or the neighboring property, you're securing yourself. So when that investor comes and then they start to pile driving, into the ground, they start doing excavation work, whatever it is that they're doing that is causing issues or affecting your property, you will have that pre-construction survey. What those investors are required, or what they need to do, is pay to get that pre-construction survey done on your property. But oftentimes they don't do that. They just move in and they just start work next door, and they start causing damage to your property. Next thing you know, sometimes you feel vibration. Sometimes you look, you see cracks appear on your property. And a lot of times the person, the homeowners, they get confused. They call the DOB. And that's one of the things you should always do. If you see work is being performed on the neighboring property and you're feeling vibrations, you're seeing cracks appearing on the foundations of your property, you call the DOB. But as always, guys, just make sure you have the pre-construction survey done, or you have pictures taken of all over your house before the construction begins, because then the surveyor tries to, the developers, they try to lie, and they try to say, well, your house had these issues before. They try to blame everyone else but themselves for damages to your property. So it's important that you have pictures to show and tell people, like, hey, this is the way this house looked before these developers came in this neighborhood. This is the way it was before they start doing their construction next door or across the street or wherever it is, because this is a trend that is happening right now in Brooklyn. All of the older houses, a lot of the older houses are being sold, torn down, and then the developer starts to do work on the neighboring property. Another thing you'll notice also, they'll try to buy your property too, because if two properties are close together and they're divided by a party wall, a lot of times it makes sense for those investors to buy both properties. And sometimes they deliberately do things to push you out of your home or to cause you to want to sell, so that they can take your property and join it with the other one and build themselves a high-rise building. So just be careful if you're a homeowner in Brooklyn and you know that you're in a neighborhood that they've been developing, they've been tearing buildings down and, refixing or rebuilding. Be careful. I think when I was with another attorney, we were in a building that attorney had owned, and that building was sold to developers who were in that neighborhood. They were pulling down buildings. They were buying buildings, buying up empty lots, buying old dilapidated buildings, and they were breaking everything down to put a new high-rise building. Where that attorney's office is, if you visit that area now, you'll see that it's gone, and they have built a building which is about 5-6 stories high. So that building no more exists, and it takes up about the span of where about 4 properties were. So that is what is happening in Brooklyn. A lot of the properties are being torn down, bought up, torn down. So if you've experienced any of this issue, if somebody has purchased a building next to you and they've been doing renovations and you notice that your building was damaged, you and be sure to contact an attorney. If you don't, then you'll be saddled with the responsibility of renovating your own property. But if you consult an attorney, the attorney will advise you and tell you what to do. Another thing some of these investors or developers are doing, they're entering into a licensing agreement with the homeowners, because most often they'll be required to use your property also, because they're required to protect your property once they're doing work next door. So they'll need to put equipment on your roof or some parts of your property so that they can offer some sort of limited protection. And the protection is not 100% guaranteed, but at least it'll protect your property to a limited extent. Just know, if you're going into a licensing agreement with any of those developers, you're entitled to compensation. So don't make them tell you that they just want to use your roof to put up equipment there so that they can protect your property without compensating you. Most times you could get at least $1,000 a month for that licensing agreement. You could get paid for it, but sometimes the homeowner is not aware and they're ignorant because they just entered into a contract with a developer without consulting an attorney. It's important, guys. Make sure you consult an attorney before you do anything with an investor, before you consult anything. And just like I said, be watchful and note that your property needs to be guarded properly. You need to ensure that you take those pictures before. So when you see cracks start appearing in your property, you know where to go and how to get it fixed. Now, a lot of times those developers has an insurance policy, which they're required to maintain. Okay, those developers are required to maintain a policy that if any resulting damage occur during their excavation or renovation to the property or rebuilding the property next door, they're required to compensate you. That policy covers compensation. But I'm gonna tell you, a lot of times, rather than them compensating you, they try to prolong, to fight, to have this issue drag on indefinitely. But the fact of the matter is, they need to compensate you for any damage that result to your property. And usually they're required to publish that on a notice on the fence, so that the neighbors can see that who is doing the construction and that they are fully insured. If they're not fully insured, your job is to report them to the DOB, because if they come and they do renovations without being properly insured, this causes problems for you down the road. Because if a contractor or subcontractor who is performing excavation or any type of construction work on an adjoining property that's causing damage to your property is not insured, at the end of the day, when you're ready to get compensated for that damage, if that person doesn't personally have the money themselves, and there's no policy to cover it, then you're in trouble. So you need to take steps fast and don't wait until there's a problem. Make sure any developer coming next door to you has the proper insurance to cover anything that would happen during the time of the construction work being done. Okay, I have several clients with this type of problem. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention, because I know some of you are homeowners in the state of New York, and you have property and you're at risk of this happening, because there new a lot of new building, a lot of new construction is happening in Brooklyn, and so you don't want to be caught up in getting your property damaged because you're ignorant of what's happening, or you don't know that you have rights to be protected. The court protects you, and if need be, the court issues an injunction to prevent the developer from continuing to do work and causing damage to you, especially if they have no insurance policy. They're required to have an insurance policy. Okay, guys? So keep that in mind when you see somebody next door sell the property and somebody comes and tear the property down. As a matter of fact, I had one of the earlier cases that I did like this involved an elderly couple. They lived in their property for many, many years. Their children was born there. Everything was done right there. And the neighbor, who was my client also, he sold his property, and these developers purchased the property from him. Once he sells his property was right next door to the neighbors. The developers moved in, and then they started immediately. They took off the roof and they started doing stuff that caused immediate damage to my client's property. As you know, most of these properties are divided by what's called a party wall. So once they remove the roof, water started getting in between on that party wall, and my client started seeing mold and mildew on their side of that wall. And then water started seeping in, and then eventually they started getting cracks, and all sorts of things started happening on their property. The foundation became cracked, the walls started shifting and became cracked. So you just have to be extremely careful, because the way these properties are built with this party wall, New York has a very unique way of how the properties are built. So be watchful, be careful. Thank you guys again for joining me today for this edition of The Law and You. This edition, as all, is brought to you by my law firm, Washington Law Firm. It's located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. Guys, if you know someone who needs help with a case involving damage to their property from the construction being done next door, you give them the number to call, 718-877-3100. We're available Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Give us a call if you're in need of legal consultation. Thank you so much, guys, and I hope to see you again next Saturday at 4 p.m. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you again next week.